The Boundary, a screenplay in 3 parts. Part 1, The Fence Line. The fence had been there since 1968, and Kate Prairie had never once thought to question it. She had grown up alongside it, the way children grow up alongside the things that define the edges of their world. Not as objects to examine, but as facts to absorb. The 63 posts of lodgepole pine ran the full length of the eastern boundary, set 18 inches into the rocky Carbon County soil by a woman Kate had never met but knew better than most people knew their living relatives. Marianne Prairie had driven those posts by hand, one by one with a driver bar and a coffee can filled with gravel tamped around each base. She had strung 3 lines of barbed wire post to post, hung a spring latch gate at the southeast corner, and in doing so had drawn a line between what belonged to the Prairie family and what did not. That line had held for 44 years before the Tuesday morning in June of 2012, when everything changed. Kate was 9 years old that summer, and she was sitting on the top rail of the corral gate, watching nothing in particular, the way children watch things when they are not paying attention and then suddenly are. The morning was clear and still, the kind of Carbon County morning where the mountains to the south looked close enough to touch, and the air smelled of dry grass and cattle and something faintly mineral from the soil. She had been awake since 5:30, which was normal. Her mother, Lena, was already in the barn, which was also normal. Kate had done her morning chores, the water buckets and the hay distribution, and the check of the gate latches, and had climbed to her usual perch on the corral rail, with her notebook in her lap. She had kept a notebook since she was 7, not because a teacher had told her to, not as a school assignment, but because she had watched her mother and her grandmother both keep notebooks, and had understood from watching them that the practice was not optional. You wrote down what you noticed. You wrote down what changed. You wrote it in the notebook because the notebook remembered things even when you forgot, and the things you forgot were usually the things that mattered later. That morning, she had written 3 lines. The southeast pasture gate is stiff again, left hinge. The indicator creek is still dry, as of yesterday. Post 31 wire sag on middle line, maybe 1 staple loose. She had written these things and was considering whether to add a 4th observation about the way the morning light was hitting the south fence line when she heard the sound. It was not a farm sound. She had grown up surrounded by farm sounds, and her ear had been calibrated by 9 years of mornings to sort them automatically, the difference between a tractor diesel and a truck diesel, between a horse moving in the barn and a coyote moving along the fence, between wind in the grass and something wrong in the way the air was moving. The sound she heard now was none of those things. It was heavy, mechanical, repetitive, and it was coming from the east, from the direction of the land that had recently changed hands. She turned on the rail and looked. The machine was a Komatsu PC 490 track excavator. She did not know that yet. She would learn it later from the equipment marking on the cab, which she would photograph from 3 angles before the morning was over. What she knew in that first moment was that it was large, that it was moving, and that it was moving toward the fence line at a speed that did not suggest it was going to stop. She watched it for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she was off the rail. She went into the house through the mudroom door and came back out with 2 things: her mother's digital camera from the kitchen counter and a yellow measuring tape from the toolbox on the mudroom shelf. She had not been told to get these things. She had not made a plan. The decision had come first, and the plan was assembling itself as she moved one piece at a time, the way the best plans always did. Before she went back out the door, she checked the camera clock on the screen and adjusted it by 2 minutes. The kitchen clock ran fast. She had discovered this months ago and had started the habit of correcting the camera before she used it for anything she might need to document later. She had not known she would be documenting something important today. She had known in a general way that any day might require it. She walked to the fence at a pace between a walk and a run, not panicked, directed. The machine had already come through. Post 17 was cracked at ground level. The excavator had not targeted it. The machine had simply moved in the direction it was pointed, and post 17 had been in that direction. and 44 years of lodgepole pine treated against Montana weather had not been enough to stop a Komatsu PC-490 moving at working speed. The wire on either side had stretched, and the posts on each side, 16 and 18, had been pulled from the ground or leaned at angles that told the story of what had happened as clearly as any witness could have told it. There was a gap in the fence 12 feet wide. The machine was already 40 feet inside the Prairie property, continuing northeast, its tracks pressing deep impressions into the softer soil near the creek drainage at the lower end of the eastern boundary. Kate photographed post 17 from 3 angles. She took the measurement, first the yellow tape extended from the cracked base of the post to where the excavator's nearest track mark began on the Prairie side of where the fence had stood. She held the tape steady and photographed it. 4 feet, 8 inches. She moved to post 18. The post was pulled from the ground, lying at a 40-degree angle, still attached to the wire on the north side. She photographed it from 2 angles with a tape showing the distance from its original base hole, which she could identify by the disturbed soil and the gravel that had been packed around the post when Marianne had set it. Then post 19, same pattern, same tape, same photographs. She was not thinking about the machine or about the man she could see climbing down from the cab in the distance. She was thinking about the next post. Her mother came out of the house when she saw Kate walking the fence with the camera. Lena Prairie was 32 years old with the kind of lean stillness that comes from a decade of working land alone, and she stood 50 feet from the fence for a moment, watching her daughter move from post to post in the methodical ways she recognized from her own fence walks with her mother Ruth, and from Ruth's fence walks with Marianne. Lena did not go to Kate. She watched, and she counted, and she went back inside to call Carter Vane. The field supervisor for Consolidated Basin Resources arrived in a white pickup truck 11 minutes after Kate started photographing. He got out and walked toward the break in the fence at a pace that was not urgent, but was purposeful, the walk of a man who had handled property disputes before and had a script for them. His name was Keith Sorley. He was a large man in his 40s, in a company polo shirt and work boots with a radio on his belt. The truck had a CBR logo on the door. He stopped at the gap where post 17 had been and looked at the 9-year-old girl who was measuring the distance from post 20's base to the nearest track impression with a yellow tape measure. "What are you doing?" he said. Kate said, "Documenting the damage." She had heard that phrase from Marianne, not from her grandmother Ruth, not from her mother, but from Marianne, who had died in 2004 when Kate was 1 year old, and whose words had been passed down through the kitchen conversations of prior women as carefully as the survey files were passed down in the filing cabinet. Kate had heard the phrase in a story her mother told about a different trespass, a different neighbor, a different year. She had not understood what documenting meant when she first heard it. She understood it now. Sorley looked at her. He looked at Lena Prairie, who had reappeared at the far edge of the yard, standing still. He said, "Your fence was in the wrong place." Kate did not respond to this. She had been told wrong things before by adults who delivered them with the flat certainty that adults used when they wanted to be believed without being questioned. She had learned from experience, and from a phrase her mother used often, that the correct response to a false statement was not argument, it was documentation. You did not need to win the conversation. You needed to record what was said. She moved to post 21, measured, photographed, wrote the post number and a brief damage description and the measurement in her notebook. The notebook was backup. The camera card was not unlimited, and she had 214 photographs to take before the morning was over. Sorley said, "Miss, I need you to go back to your side of the fence line." Kate said, "I am on my side. This fence is on our boundary." She photographed post 21. "My great-grandmother built it in 1968. We had it surveyed in 2008. Sorley said, "By who?" She said, "Gil Haverford out of Billings." She moved to post 22. Sorley walked back to his truck. He got on the radio. Whatever he said, the excavator did not move again that day. Inside the house, Lena Pryor was talking to Carter Vane, who had answered on the second ring. Carter was a general practice attorney in Red Lodge, who had handled the Pryor estate after Ruth died in 2007, and who had since become the person Lena called when something with a legal dimension came up on the farm. He was not a pipeline attorney. He was a Carbon County attorney, which meant he handled whatever Carbon County families brought him. And right now, what Lena was bringing him was a pipeline company whose excavator had broken through a boundary fence and whose supervisor had told her 9-year-old daughter that the fence was in the wrong place. Carter's first question was not about the machine. It was not about the trespass. It was, how many photographs does she have so far? Lena said, she's still out there. I don't know. Carter said, tell her to keep going. Every post, every break, every track mark. Measure what she can measure. Write down the post numbers. Make sure the date and time are showing on every frame. Lena said, she sets the camera clock every morning. She's been doing it since she started using the camera. There was a pause on Carter's end. How old is she? 9. Another pause. And she sets the clock every morning. She said she wanted to know when she took things. Carter said, okay, keep her documenting. Don't let the 2008 survey out of the house. Find out how they got onto your property. Ask Sorley directly, and ask him in front of Kate while she's still at the fence. Write down what he says the moment you're back inside. Lena found Sorley leaning against his truck when she walked to the fence. Kate was at post 24 measuring. Lena stood at the gap where post 17 had been and asked Sorley directly how his company's equipment had come to cross the boundary. Sorley said the route had been staked by the company's field engineer the previous week, and the operator had followed the stakes. He said the stakes had shown the boundary 20 feet west of where Lena's fence stood. Lena said, do you have documentation for where your engineer staked the boundary? Sorley said, that's proprietary company information. Lena said, I have a certified survey from 2008 that places this fence on the boundary or within 3 inches of it for its entire length. Would you like to see it? She had brought the survey with her. She had pulled it from the kitchen filing cabinet before she came outside, not because Carter had told her to bring it, but because she understood the difference between saying you had a document and standing in front of someone holding it. She took the certified plat from its folder and held it where Sorley could read it. The surveyor's certification was at the bottom, in clear print, Gil Haverford's name and license number, the coordinates for the east boundary corners in a table on the right, and the date, August 14th, 2008, under the title block. Sorley read it. He did not say anything for a long moment. He looked at the plat, then at the fence, then at the plat again. He was a man who dealt in field stakes and GPS equipment and company schedules, and he was looking at 4 years of certified legal standing in a manila folder held by a woman who had been awake since before him and who had sent her daughter to photograph 41 fence posts while he was still drinking his morning coffee. He said, you'll need to refer that to company counsel. Lena said, have your counsel call ours. She put the survey back in its folder and walked to where Kate had fallen into step beside her, and they went inside together without looking back. Kate had photographed 41 fence posts by noon. Of the 41, 23 were intact. 18 showed damage in varying degrees, 5 cracked at ground level, like post 17, 6 pulled from the ground entirely, 4 leaning at angles consistent with wire tension from adjacent post movement, and 3 showing track marks in the soil within 18 inches of the post base. She had laid the measuring tape at every damaged post before photographing. She had photographed the tape and the damage in the same frame so that both were visible together because a county inspector had once told her, when she was 7 years old, that a photograph without a measurement was just a picture. She had also photographed the excavator's full track pattern across the Prairie side of the boundary from post 17, continuing northeast for approximately 60 feet before the machine had turned back toward the CBR land. She had measured each track impression that fell clearly on the Prairie side, 14 inches wide, 3 to 4 inches deep in the softer ground near the creek drainage, shallower on the harder soil, farther from the water. The creek drainage. She had noticed it when she was measuring the tracks near post 25, the small seasonal creek that ran along the lower end of the eastern boundary, the one that Marianne had called the indicator, because it was the first thing that showed you the water table was moving. It dried up in August and ran fast in spring. The excavator tracks had crossed the dry creek bed at an angle, pressing into the soft creek bottom soil deep enough to leave clear impressions. Kate photographed those too, with the tape measuring the width of the track against the width of the creek bed itself. She did not know yet exactly what it meant that the machine had crossed a seasonal creek on private land, but she understood that it meant something different from crossing dry ground, and she wrote in her notebook, "Machine tracks cross seasonal creek approximately 22 feet inside boundary. Creek bed disturbed. Photographs Q through T." After Sorley left, he went back through the gap in the fence and crossed the CBR side. Kate watched him for a moment, then looked at the undocumented approach tracks on the CBR side, the sequence of impressions leading from the CBR land to the boundary break. She went back through the gap. Sorley was near his truck. He watched her cross onto the CBR side and began photographing the approach pattern. "You need to stay on your side," he said. Kate said, "I'm photographing your equipment's approach to the boundary from your side. That's not trespassing." Sorley said, "How do you know where the boundary is?" She pointed at the line of intact fence posts remaining south of the gap. "My great-grandmother set those posts in 1968, she said. A licensed surveyor confirmed they were on the boundary in 2008. If you want to argue they're wrong, you'll need a newer survey than ours." She photographed 4 more approach sequences, noted the track width and depth in her notebook, and crossed back to the prior side. She did not hurry. She did not look at Sorley when she passed him. She walked to where her mother was waiting near the new gap in a 44-year-old fence, and did not stop until she was standing beside her on prior ground. That evening, after Lena had made a second call to Carter and written down everything Sorley had said in the precise order he had said it, she opened the kitchen drawer to find a pen, and her hand found something underneath the stack of current notebooks. An older spiral notebook, the cover faded to the pale blue of something that had sat at the bottom of a drawer for years. Ruth's handwriting on the cover label in the careful block letters Ruth had used for everything she wrote down. Lena sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Most of what Ruth had written in it was the ordinary record of a working farm, the same kind of records that went back through generations of prior notebooks, stacked in the same drawer: yield numbers, fence repair dates, equipment maintenance, grazing rotation notes. But near the back, in an entry dated September 2006, Ruth had written something different. The handwriting was slightly more careful than usual, the kind of precision that came when someone was writing down something they wanted to be able to read back accurately. CBR representative came by, asked about right-of-way easement along east boundary 60-foot corridor, said they were planning a pipeline project, timing uncertain, would pay fair market plus 15%. I said I'd think about it. I called Carter. Carter said, "Don't sign anything, see what the full project looks like first." I told the CBR rep that. He left a card. I threw it away. Lena read the entry twice. Then she read the entries around it, looking for follow-up. 3 weeks later, Ruth had written, "CBR did not call back. Good." She closed the notebook and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. Ruth had died in 2007. CBR had acquired the adjacent land in early 2012. Someone at CBR had known about the prior property 6 years before the trespass. They had approached Ruth when she was still alive and received a refusal. And then they had come back after she was gone with a pipeline and a schedule, and an excavator operator following incorrect stakes. Kate was at the far end of the table, labeling the afternoon's photographs in her notebook by exhibit letter. She had asked Lena what exhibit meant that morning, and Lena had explained it, and now Kate was using it with the casual precision of a child who had absorbed a new word and immediately put it to work. She was on Exhibit J. "Mom," Kate said without looking up. "Yes." If they already knew where our fence was before they started, why did they cross it? Lena looked at her daughter's bent head, the careful handwriting moving across the notebook page. I don't know yet, she said. Is that what we're going to find out? Yes, Lena said. That's what we're going to find out. Carter arrived the next morning at 8 with a copy of CBR's federal pipeline easement, which he had obtained the previous afternoon from the FERC Public Filings database. He spread the easement map on the kitchen table beside Lena's 2008 survey and put his finger on the corridor boundary. Their easement corridor runs here, he said. Their eastern boundary of the permitted corridor is 40 feet west of your fence line at the point where the trespass occurred. Lena looked at the two maps. The distance between the permitted corridor edge and the prior fence line was a clear gap on both documents, measurable, unambiguous. So their equipment crossed 40 feet beyond their own authorized zone before it even reached our fence, she said. Yes, Carter said. This isn't one violation, it's two. The trespass onto your property is the first. The second is construction outside the permitted easement corridor, which is a regulatory matter between CBR and FERC and has nothing to do with your property line except that it happened at the same time. Kate had put down her pencil. She was looking at the two maps from the end of the table. Carter looked at her. How many photographs do you have? 214, she said. Of what? She listed them in sequence, the damage documentation by post number from 17 through 37, the track measurements on the prior side, the approach tracks from the CBR side, 2 photographs of Sorley's truck with the CBR logo visible, and 1 photograph she had taken near the end of the morning that she had not been asked to take and had not mentioned yet. She picked up the camera and found the image. It was a wide shot of the full eastern fence line taken from the southwest corner of the property, looking northeast along the full 63-post run. The posts were small against the foothills. The mountains rose behind them in the way mountains framed everything in Carbon County, making human work look both deliberate and small. The fence ran clear and unbroken from the camera to the damage zone, and then the gap was visible, and then the remaining posts running north. Carter looked at the photograph for a long time. Why did you take that one? He said. So you could see the scale, Kate said. The other photographs show where the damage is, but you can't tell from post 17 that the fence was 63 posts long and had been standing since 1968. If you only see the break, you don't see what was broken. Carter handed the camera back. He said to Lena, she documented this better than most adults would have. Lena said, she keeps a notebook. Carter put both maps back in their folders and placed them side by side with Kate's camera on the kitchen table between them. The morning sun came through the kitchen window and lit the surface at an angle that made everything on it look like evidence, which it was. That same evening, after Carter had laid out the plan for the letter and gone back to Red Lodge, Ray Dunlop drove up the Prairie Road in his old tan pickup. Ray was 71 years old, the former owner of the land that adjoined the Prairie property from the north, a man who had sold his 600 acres to a development company in 2009 and had spent the years since driving the county roads and watching what was being built on land that had once been his. He had not been asked to come. He had seen the machine from the highway that morning and had put the pieces together the way men who have spent their lives reading a county put things together. Equipment company, truck, broken fence, Prairie farm. He sat across from Lena at the kitchen table and turned his hat in his hands and said what he had come to say. Lena, I've watched 3 families in this county go up against companies like CBR. I want you to know what I saw. He looked at his hat. One of them had a better case than you. Stronger documentation, longer history, cleaner title. They fought for 2 years. They got some money at the end. Not as much as they spent on the attorney, and they sold a right-of-way easement in the final settlement that they did not want to sell. The company had time. They didn't. Lena did not say anything. Ray said, Carter is a good man, but he's a local attorney, and they have people in Houston and Denver who do this every year. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that right and winning are not always the same thing. He put his hat back on and stood up. At the door, he said, I just wanted you to know what I saw. After he left, Lena sat at the table for a moment. Kate had been in the kitchen during the entire conversation, in the chair beside the refrigerator, with her notebook in her lap. She was 9 years old, and she had understood every word that Ray Dunlop had said. And she had sat perfectly still and listened without interrupting. She said, Do you believe him? Lena said, I believe he saw what he says he saw. Kate thought about that. But that's not the same as it being true for us. No, Lena said. It's not. She went to the kitchen drawer and put Ruth's notebook on the table between them. Kate looked at it. Lena opened it to the September 2006 entry and read it to her daughter, word for word. The CBR representative, the right-of-way offer, Ruth's call to Carter, her refusal. Kate listened. When Lena finished reading, Kate said, She already said no. Yes. And they came anyway. Yes. Kate picked up her own notebook and opened it to the section in the back where she had been keeping the fence documentation since July. She turned to a new page and wrote the date. Beneath it, she wrote, Ruth said no in 2006. They knew where the fence was. They came anyway. We have 214 photographs and a certified survey in Ruth's notebook, and we are not selling anything. She closed the notebook and put it on the table beside Ruth's. The two notebooks sat there, old handwriting beside new, one woman's refusal from 6 years ago, lying beside her granddaughter's documentation from this morning. And together, they said something that neither one of them said alone. They said that the Prairie family had been paying attention to this land for a long time, and that paying attention was its own kind of argument. Part 2. The response. The letter went out on a Thursday, 7 days after the trespass. Carter had organized it the way he organized the cases that mattered, with the structure of a document that expected to be read by people who were looking for a reason to dismiss it, and intended to give them none. 4 pages, 19 exhibits, the 2008 survey first, then the CBR easement map with the corridor boundary marked in red, then Kate's photographs in sequence from Exhibit G through Exhibit S, each printed at full page with the timestamp visible and a caption beneath each image that used precise language and no emotional rhetoric. Post 17 cracked at ground level track impression 4.8 inches from base. Post 18, wire separation pulled from ground. Exhibit S, full eastern fence line from southwest corner, pre-damage context, 63 posts established 1968. Carter had written the request for Exhibit S's caption himself after Kate had told him why she'd taken it. He had used her words exactly. The letter asked for a response within 14 days. CBR's legal department responded in 6, which Carter had not expected. A fast response from a company that size meant one of two things. They thought the matter was simple enough to dismiss quickly, or they had looked at the exhibits and decided that speed was better than silence. He read the 8 pages from CBR's Denver counsel, standing at his kitchen counter before he called Lena, because he needed to understand what he was looking at before he explained it. He called her at 7 in the morning. She answered before the second ring. They responded, he said. 8 pages, 4 arguments. Tell me. First, they dispute the boundary location and request an independent survey. Second, they characterize the fence damage as inadvertent and offer to repair it at their expense. Third, they say Sorley's statement about the fence being in the wrong place was based on information provided by their own survey team, not a false claim. Fourth, they call the incident a minor construction irregularity and suggest it be resolved at that level. There was a silence on the line. Lena said, minor? Their word. Their equipment crossed 40 feet past their own permitted zone and then broke through a 44-year-old fence and told my daughter it was in the wrong place, and they're calling it minor. They're calling it minor because their attorney has not yet sat across from Exhibit S, Carter said. The fence repair offer is real, and we should accept it in principle. The independent survey is also something we actually want because a second confirmation from a surveyor, CBR, hired removes the boundary question from any further dispute. The minor characterization is the argument they'll abandon once they understand what the documentation looks like assembled. Lena said, "What about the FERC violation? I filed the compliance report on Monday. FERC will investigate the corridor deviation. That runs on its own timeline, separate from our case, but it creates regulatory pressure on CBR that has nothing to do with us managing." He could hear her breathing steadily, the way she breathed when she was deciding something. He said, "We're going to write a response, measured, factual, firm. We accept the independent survey, we decline the characterization, and we add something to the record." "What?" "I want to address the wetland issue before they raise it." Lena was quiet. Carter said, "Their response letter has one sentence near the end that I want you to hear verbatim." He found the page and read it. The sentence referred to the seasonal creek crossing on the Prairie property and noted that wetland features in the vicinity of the trespass area might require assessment under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and that CBR reserved the right to raise this in any further proceedings. Lena said, "They're threatening to make this about our land. They're putting a card on the table," Carter said. "They haven't played it yet, but I want to pull its teeth before they decide to." Kate's photographs of the creek crossing already established the disturbance was caused by the excavator. The creek was dry and unbothered before the machine crossed it. The photographs are time-stamped the morning of the trespass. Any Section 404 question becomes a question about what CBR's equipment did to a seasonal waterway on private property they were not authorized to enter. Lena said, "So their threat becomes evidence against them. If they push it, yes." He paused. It was good that she photographed the creek. Lena said, "She noticed it herself. I didn't ask her to." Carter said, "I know." He did not say what he was thinking, which was that Kate Pryor's instinct to photograph the creek drainage had preemptively closed an argument that CBR's legal team had apparently considered worth including as a future pressure point. The 9-year-old had been 3 steps ahead of the Denver attorneys without knowing she was playing the same game. 3 days after Carter's response went out, Margaret Holt called Lena's direct number. Lena did not recognize the name. She answered. The woman on the other end spoke in the professional register of someone accustomed to making uncomfortable conversations seem reasonable, a particular skill that Lena recognized because she had heard it before in the voice of the county assessor when he came to discuss the tax valuation on the lower pasture, and in the voice of the bank manager the year she had taken out the equipment loan after Ruth died. It was the voice of someone who believed that the right tone of reasonableness could move people faster than the right argument. Margaret Holt said she was calling as a representative of CBR's legal department to explore whether the matter could be resolved without extended proceedings. She said CBR genuinely wanted to make things right. She said the company was prepared to offer fence repair at their full cost, plus $15,000 in compensation for the inconvenience in exchange for a mutual release of further claims. She said, "We want this resolved quickly, and we think you do too. These things can drag on for a very long time when both sides dig in. 2 years, sometimes 3. That's a long time for a working farm." Lena did not say yes. She did not say no. She said she would be in touch and ended the call. Then she called Carter. He was quiet for longer than she expected. Then he said, "Did she contact you directly without going through me?" "Yes." "That's a violation of the professional conduct rules that apply to opposing counsel," he said. "She knows I'm your attorney of record. Contacting you directly is not something she should have done." Lena said, "I didn't hang up immediately." "I know you didn't," Carter said, "and I'm not blaming you. But from this point, any communication from CBR or their attorneys goes through me. Not because you can't handle it, but because every direct contact is an opportunity for something you say to be taken out of context in a document later." There was a sharpness in his voice that Lena was not used to hearing from him. She said, "Are you angry at me?" A pause. "I'm concerned," he said. "You're carrying this alone, and they know it, and they're using it. The call wasn't an offer. It was a test to see how close you are to folding. He let that sit for a moment. How close are you? Lena looked at the two notebooks on the kitchen table, still there from 2 nights ago. Ruth's faded blue cover, Kate's newer green one. She said, "Not close." Carter said, "Good, then we keep going." The independent survey began on a Tuesday in late July. Dennis Park drove up from Bozeman in a truck with a Montana licensed land surveyor placard in the window and set up his equipment at the south end of the eastern boundary without fanfare or announcement. Carter had arranged the access and the scope. 2 days on the eastern boundary, all 4 corners if possible, confirmation of the 2008 Haverford survey coordinates. Lena stayed out of his way. Kate did not. Not intrusively. She did not speak to Park while he was working, did not stand near his equipment, did not ask questions that would distract him. But she was present at a respectful distance, moving parallel to his work. She had her notebook. She was writing down what she observed, the equipment he used, the landmarks he referenced for his sightlines, the time he spent at each corner stake. She was not doing this to check his work. She was doing it because she had learned from years of watching her mother and her grandmother that you understood a thing better when you watched it being done. And she did not yet fully understand how a survey worked. On the afternoon of the second day, Dennis Park was working in the section of boundary between posts 28 and 35, confirming the coordinates of the intermediate points. Kate was 30 feet away, sitting on a flat rock with her notebook. Park glanced at her twice. On the third glance, he said, "You the one who did the trespass documentation?" She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at his instrument. He said, 214 photographs. Yes. Carter showed me Exhibit S. He bent to his instrument again. That was a good shot. Kate wrote in her notebook, "Park has seen Exhibit S." Then Park said, "Come here a moment." She went to where he was standing. He pointed at the ground near post 31 at a spot 2 feet west of the post base where the soil was slightly different from the surrounding ground. The difference was subtle. A small depression, the grass growing slightly less dense. The soil at the edge of the depression showing a color that was marginally darker. Park said, "What do you make of that?" Kate looked at it. She crouched and looked more carefully. She said, "It looks like something was buried there. The soil settled differently." She looked at the depression for a moment. "Something buried a long time ago." Park said, "Yes." He was looking at his GPS equipment. He said, "Do you know what it is?" She said, "No." He said, "I might." He made a note in his field book and did not say anything more. Kate went back to her rock and wrote, "Depression in ground 2 feet west of post 31. Park noticed it. Something buried. He made a note. I don't know what it means yet. That evening, she took the notebook to the kitchen and showed her mother the entry. Lena looked at it and called Carter. Carter called Park. Park told him he would need to excavate carefully around the depression before completing his report, but that based on what he'd seen, he had a hypothesis about what was there. And if the hypothesis was correct, it would change the weight of the documentation considerably. Carter said, "In which direction?" Park said, "Ours." Lena was awake at 5 a.m. the next morning at the kitchen table with Ruth's notebook open to a page she had not looked at before. A page from 1998, the year Ruth had taken over the farm. In Ruth's careful block letters, one line, "Mary Ann says the old survey stake from the 1921 deed description may still be in the ground near the creek end of the fence. She never found it again after 1968. Too much grass." Lena read the line twice. Then she read it a third time. She did not call Carter. It was 5 a.m. She sat with the information and let it settle the way she had learned to sit with things that were large before deciding what to do with them. What she understood was this: if there was something buried near post 31, and if that something was a survey reference from 1921, then the Prairie family's claim to this boundary did not begin with Mary Ann's fence in 1968 or with Haverford's survey in 2008. It went back to a deed description from 1921, 4 years after the end of the First World War, 47 years before the fence, 91 years before CBR's excavator came through it. The next morning, Ray Dunlop came back. This time, he did not come alone. The man with him was Tom Greer, 58-year-old rancher from 2 counties over, with a lean jaw and careful eyes, and the posture of a man who had spent years being cautious about what he said. Ray introduced him and said Tom had been through something similar and had something Lena should hear. They sat at the kitchen table. Tom told his story in the flat, factual way of someone who had told it enough times that the emotion had been pressed out of it, leaving only the structure. He had owned 400 acres in Stillwater County. A mineral extraction company had disputed his access road easement. He had documentation. He had a good attorney. He had gone to court. He said, "I lost. Not because my case was weak, my case was solid. I lost because they could pay their attorneys to file motions for 2 years, and I couldn't pay mine to respond to all of them. By the end, I had spent more than the land was worth fighting for what was already mine. I settled for less than I should have, and I signed a release, and I never got a full acknowledgement of what they did." He looked at Lena steadily. He said, "I'm not saying don't fight. I'm saying know what you're getting into." Lena listened to all of it. She thanked him. She said she appreciated him coming. After they left, Kate came out of the back of the house where she had been reading and had heard every word through the open kitchen window. She had her notebook. She sat down across from her mother and put the notebook on the table. "I wrote down what he said," she told Lena. While he was saying it, Lena looked at her. Kate said, "Is there a way to check if his story is true, if there's a public record of his case?" Lena called Carter and asked him. Carter said he'd look into it and call back 40 minutes later. He said there was a Stillwater County court record for Thomas Greer versus Cascade Mineral Resources that had been filed in 2016 and settled in 2018. He said the settlement was sealed. He said there was one other thing. He said, Tom Greer is listed as a paid consultant on CBR's community outreach filings with the Montana Public Service Commission starting in 2019. Lena did not say anything for a moment. Carter said, "He's being paid by CBR. I don't know if he knows it. He may be getting a consulting retainer through a third-party firm and not know who the ultimate client is. But his story delivered to you right now serves CBR's interests, whether or not he intended it to." Lena hung up and looked at Kate across the table. "They sent someone to scare us," Kate said. "Someone who may not have known he was being sent," Lena said. Kate thought about that. "Is that worse?" Lena said, "It means they're careful." Kate opened her notebook to a new page and wrote, "Tom Greer is paid by CBR. He may not know. Ray Dunlop brought him because he thought he was helping. They are using people who don't know they're being used." She closed the notebook. She looked at her mother. She said, "What happens when Dennis Park finishes his survey?" Lena said, "We find out what's buried near Post 31. Kate said, "And if it's what you think it is." Lena looked at Ruth's notebook on the table, at the line about Mary Ann and the 1921 stake and the grass that had grown over it. She said, "Then this boundary is older than anyone in that CBR legal department has bothered to look." Part 3. The Monument. Dennis Park came back on the third morning with a flat spade and a small brush, the kind archaeologists use to clear soil from fragile things. And Kate understood from the care with which he carried these tools that whatever was under the ground near Post 31 was something he intended to treat as evidence rather than obstacle. Lena and Kate stood at the distance that Park had established without words, close enough to see far enough not to disturb his work. The morning was cooler than the days before, a bank of high cloud from the northwest softening the light. The indicator creek, still dry, showed its white creek-bottom stones in a pale line along the lower boundary. Kate had her notebook. She was not writing yet. She was watching. Park worked carefully. He removed the topsoil in thin, horizontal layers, setting each scoop to the side in sequence so that he could document the stratigraphy if it proved necessary. At 8 inches, he found the first indication of color change in the soil, a dark, circular stain of the kind that comes from iron oxidizing slowly in contact with the surrounding earth over a very long time. At 12 inches, his spade touched something solid. He switched to the brush. What he uncovered over the next 40 minutes was a cast iron survey monument, cylindrical, approximately 3 inches in diameter and 14 inches long, with a flat cap at the top, on which the words U.S. Public Land Survey had been stamped in raised lettering that was still legible despite the rust and compaction of 9 decades in the ground. Below the text, a date, 1921. Kate wrote in her notebook without looking down from memory the exact entry she had made 2 days before. Depression in ground 2 feet west of post 31. Park noticed it. Something buried. He made a note. Then she wrote a new line. Monument found. Cast iron. U.S. Public Land Survey, 1921. Approximately 2 feet west of post 31. Confirmed by Park. Park stood and photographed the monument in situ before touching it further. He photographed it from 4 angles with his field camera using a ranging rod for scale. He noted the GPS coordinates of the monument's center. Then he looked at his receiver screen for a long moment with the expression of a man confirming something he had already suspected. He turned to Lena. He said, "This is the original section corner reference monument from the 1921 government resurvey. It's the benchmark that the 1961 deed description for this property was tied to." He paused. "It's also 1.8 feet west of the Haverford 2008 survey coordinates for this boundary segment." Lena said, "What does that mean?" Park said, "It means Haverford's survey was accurate to within 2 feet of the original monument, which is within normal tolerance for a survey conducted without physical access to a buried monument. It also means that when I tie my survey to this monument directly, the boundary line will be confirmed at or within 1 inch of where Haverford placed it." He looked at the monument. "And it means that the prior boundary claim is grounded in a federal survey reference from 1921. That is the oldest possible legal basis for a boundary line in this part of Montana." Kate looked at the monument in the ground, the flat cap with its stamped letters, the date that was older than anyone in her family who was still living. She thought about what it meant that Marianne had known this was somewhere in the ground, had known it in 1968 when she was setting her posts, had never found it again, and had noted it in the handover record she gave to Ruth in 1998. The knowledge had traveled from woman to woman through notebooks and conversations for 44 years, waiting for someone to dig. She wrote, Marianne knew. Ruth wrote it down. It was here the whole time. Carter received Park's field notes by the end of the day and called Lena at 6 that evening. He was quieter than usual, with the particular quietness of a man who was recalculating the dimensions of a case he had already thought he understood. He said, "The 1921 monument changes things." Lena said, "How?" CBR's response letter raised the wetland issue and used language that implied this property's boundary history was uncertain enough to warrant a broader review. They were preparing an argument that the boundary itself was contested, not just the location of your fence. He paused. With the 1921 monument, there is no credible argument that this boundary is contested. The boundary is grounded in a federal land survey reference from the year Warren Harding was president. Any surveyor CBR brings in, any argument CBR makes runs into that monument. Lena said, "Will they try to argue around it?" Carter said, "Their attorney will try. That's her job." He paused. "Her name is Margaret Holt. She's very capable. But I want you to understand something. Kate's notebook entry from April 2011, the one noting the depression in the ground near post 31, predates every aspect of this dispute. No survey work, no trespass, no CBR involvement in Carbon County at all. It predates the CBR land acquisition by nearly a year. There is no mechanism by which that entry can be argued as fabricated or influenced by our legal strategy, because it was written before our legal strategy existed. Lena was quiet for a moment. She said, she noticed the ground was different and wrote it down. Carter said, she noticed the ground was different and wrote it down. Park completed his survey report 4 days later. 3 days of field work, 1 day of computation, and certification. The document was 22 pages with 4 attached exhibits, including the coordinate tables, the monument photographs, the stratigraphy notes from the excavation, and the certified comparison of his boundary line to the 2008 Haverford survey. His conclusions were clear. The eastern boundary of the Prairie property was confirmed at the surveyed location to within 1 inch. The 1968 Marianne Prairie fence had been built within 3 inches of the legal boundary for its entire 63-post length. The excavator trespass had occurred 44 feet inside the Prairie boundary. 2 days after Carter received Park's report, Margaret Holt filed a supplemental brief with the county court. She argued that the 1921 monument, having been discovered during a survey commissioned by CBR, constituted new evidence of a pre-existing boundary ambiguity rather than a confirmation of the prior claim. She characterized the monument's displacement from the Haverford survey coordinates, 1.8 feet, as evidence of accumulated survey error over time, and argued that the correct interpretation required a fresh adjudication of the full boundary history. Lena read Carter's summary of the brief over the phone and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "They're using the monument we found against us." Carter said, "They're attempting to reframe a confirmation as a question. It's a tactic, not an argument. The tactic requires the judge to ignore that the monument confirms the Haverford survey within normal tolerance. Ignore that Kate's 2011 notebook entry establishes the monument's location was noted before the dispute began, and ignore that Park's report is built on the standard methodology of tying to original federal benchmarks, which is exactly what a licensed surveyor is supposed to do." He paused. "Judge Claire Weston is hearing this. She has been on the county bench for 11 years, and before that was a title attorney for 9. She has spent 2 decades reading boundary disputes." Lena said, "Is she good?" Carter said, "She is precise. She reads everything, and she reads it carefully. Which means what I'm going to submit to her is a document that rewards careful reading." He submitted it on a Wednesday morning. 15 pages, 5 attached exhibits. The chronological anchor was Kate's April 2011 notebook entry. Carter had arranged the document so that every exhibit was presented in the order it had come into existence. The 1921 monument, first the Haverford survey, second, Kate's 2011 notebook entry, third, Park's survey report, fourth, and as a final exhibit, a side-by-side comparison table of every data point across all 3 surveys. The 1921 federal benchmark, the 2008 Haverford survey, and the 2012 Park survey, showing the coordinate differences and the tolerance margins. The table was Kate's idea. She had looked at Carter's draft and said, "If I were reading this and I wanted to understand whether the surveys agreed with each other, I'd want to see all 3 numbers in one place." Carter had added the table and noted the source in the document's acknowledgments. Judge Weston held a brief hearing 1 week later. She had read everything. Carter could tell from the questions she asked. She did not ask about the law. She asked about the specific facts, the date of Kate's notebook entry, the depth at which the monument was found, the tolerance range for federal survey monuments of that period. She asked Carter whether there was any established basis for the 1921 monument being displaced from its original position. Carter said, "Park found no evidence of disturbance to the monument or the surrounding soil below 8 inches. The topsoil displacement above 8 inches is consistent with 9 decades of normal agricultural ground movement. The monument itself was in its original setting." Judge Weston said, "And the entry in the miner's notebook predates the land acquisition by the defendant by how long?" Carter said, "Approximately 11 months." Weston said, "Thank you," and closed her notes. She issued her ruling 3 days later. 7 pages. She found that the 1921 monument constituted direct confirmation of the boundary's Federal Land Survey origin. She found that the Park Survey, as a direct tie to the monument, was methodologically superior to any interpretation based on indirect coordinates. She found that the 1.8-foot displacement between Park and Haverford was within accepted tolerance and did not constitute evidence of boundary ambiguity. She found that the supplemental brief filed by CBR's counsel did not raise a cognizable claim of boundary contest under Montana property law. She granted the restraining order preventing further construction within 100 feet of the prior eastern boundary, pending final resolution of all outstanding claims. Margaret Holt called Carter the day after the ruling and said CBR was prepared to discuss a comprehensive settlement. Carter called Lena and told her. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do we want?" Carter said, "Everything we asked for in the July letter, plus one more thing." The settlement took 3 weeks to negotiate. Margaret Holt was professional throughout. The anger she must have felt at losing an argument she had built carefully was not visible in the calls or the documents. She was doing her job, and her job was now to limit her client's exposure, and she did that with the same precision she had used to construct the boundary ambiguity argument that had not survived contact with Kate Pryor's 2011 notebook. CBR agreed to replace all 18 damaged fence posts with treated lodgepole pine matching the diameter of Marianne's originals. They agreed to restring 3 lines of new barbed wire along the full eastern boundary. They agreed to grade and reseed the 60 feet of disturbed soil on the Prairie side, including the area of the creek crossing where the machine had pressed into the creek bed. They paid Carter's fees and the cost of Gil Haverford's original 2008 survey. They issued a written acknowledgement on company letterhead stating that the trespass had occurred, that the prior boundary was confirmed at the surveyed location, including the 1921 federal monument, and that CBR's construction activity had operated outside the permitted easement corridor. The acknowledgement was 4 sentences. Carter had written 3 of them himself, and Margaret Holt had added a 4th that specified the boundary coordinates which Carter had accepted because it was precise and accurate and made the acknowledgement stronger rather than weaker. The 6th item was new. CBR agreed to commission a full coordinate audit of their pipeline easement corridor using current federal survey monuments as primary references, replacing the outdated section corner data they had used for initial staking. The audit would cover the full 3,000-acre project area and would be completed before resumption of construction. Carter had requested this not for Lena's benefit because her boundary was now confirmed 3 times over, but because he knew that the outdated monument data that had sent the excavator 40 feet past the corridor boundary had affected the staking of the entire project. There were other landowners along the route. Not all of them had Kate. Ray Dunlop came by the Pryor farm 2 days before the settlement was signed. He came alone this time, without his hat, which was unusual for a man who had worn a hat every day of his adult life in this county. He stood at the kitchen door and said he needed to say something. Lena let him in. He sat down and said, "I found out about Tom Greer after you did. Carter called me." He looked at the table. "I brought a man to your kitchen who was being paid to discourage you, and I didn't know it. That's on me." Lena said, "You didn't know." Ray said, "I've been telling people in this county for 3 years that you can't fight companies like CBR. I told myself I was being realistic." He paused. "I think I was just tired, and I let my tired become advice." Lena said, "You watched 3 families lose, and you're not losing," he said. "And I want you to know I understand the difference between what happened to them and what happened here, and the difference is not luck." He looked at the 2 notebooks on the kitchen table, Ruth's faded cover and Kate's green cover, sitting where Lena had left them for the past 6 weeks. He said, "Is that how you did it? Those notebooks?" Lena said, "That's how we've always done it." After Ray left, Lena sat at the table for a long time. Kate was in the barn doing the evening checks. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the refrigerator and the wind moving across the hill to the south. She looked at the two notebooks, and then she looked at the filing cabinet in the corner where the survey files were kept, and at the wall above it where the family photographs were hung. She got up and went to the drawer under the filing cabinet and found a simple frame, the kind you bought at a hardware store, the kind that held a single sheet of paper. She took the settlement acknowledgement, the 4 sentences on CBR company letterhead, confirming that the trespass had occurred, that the boundary was confirmed at the surveyed location, that the construction had operated outside the permitted corridor, and that the prior property line was grounded in a federal survey monument from 1921. She placed it in the frame. She hung it on the kitchen wall beside the photograph of Marianne Pryor in 1968, the photograph she had first found in the bottom of the old photograph box when she was helping Ruth sort the house the year before Ruth got sick. Marianne was 41 years old in the photograph, wearing work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat against the Montana sun, with the driver bar resting over her shoulder the way a soldier carries a rifle. And behind her, running to the horizon, 63 posts of lodgepole pine that she had set in the ground one by one. The framed acknowledgement hung level on the wall. The photograph hung level beside it. In the photograph, Marianne was looking not at the camera, but at something to the left, probably the fence line, checking the alignment. In the acknowledgement, CBR confirmed in 4 sentences that the fence she was checking had been in the right place. Lena went back to the table and sat for a moment longer, and then she went out to the barn to find Kate. On the Saturday after the settlement was signed, Lena and Kate walked the new fence together. They started at the northwest corner at sunrise and worked south, post by post, the way the practice had been handed down through every generation of prior women. You walked the fence. You checked each post for rot at the ground line, the wire for breaks or sag, the staples for pull-out, the gate hardware for wear. You did this not because fences failed dramatically, but because they failed one small thing at a time. And the small thing you caught early was a repair you made in an hour. And the small thing you missed was an animal lost in the night, or a boundary crossed by someone who believed it was unclear. Marianne had taught this as a practice. She had not explained why. The explanation was in the doing. The new posts were treated lodgepole pine, the same species as Marianne's originals, set straight in the Carbon County ground. The wire was bright between them, not yet weathered to the gray of the surviving old posts, taut and clean along the eastern boundary. At post 17, the one that had cracked at ground level on the morning in June, the new post stood exactly where the old one had stood, 18 inches in the ground. The same gravel tamping Marianne had used, still visible in the method, even in new materials. Kate put her hand on post 17 when they reached it. She did not say anything. She felt the wood still smooth from the mill, the surface not yet roughened by wind and weather. The post would stand until it rotted. Her daughter, if she had one, would walk this fence and check this post. Her granddaughter would read about it in the notebook. Lena said, "Your grandmother told me something when she handed the farm over. She said, 'You know this land. Now it's yours. Learn the rest as you need it.'" Kate looked at her. Lena said, "You already know more of the rest than Ruth knew at your age. Maybe more than I did at 20. Kate said, "What do I still need to learn?" Lena thought for a moment. She said, "How to know when to stop. When the work is done and you can put down the notebook and just stand here." Kate looked at the fence line running south to the gate and north to the hill, the new wire catching the early light, the mountains behind it, unchanged. She said, "Is this one of those times?" Lena said, "Close to it." They stood at post 17 together for a moment, not documenting, not measuring, not writing anything down. The mountains were pale blue in the morning light. The indicator creek was still dry, but there was a smell of moisture from the north that suggested the water table was moving. The gate at the southeast corner would need checking. There were always things to check, but not yet. They stood and looked at what had been built, what had been broken, and what had been restored. And the restored thing was indistinguishable from the original, except that the wood was newer and the wire was brighter, and the survey coordinates in the county records now pointed to a federal monument from 1921 that had been in the ground the whole time, waiting. When they reached the southeast corner, Kate opened her notebook. She wrote the date. She wrote, "Fence intact. All posts, new wire. Gate latch good. Post 17 standing. The old monument is still down there." She paused. Then she wrote one more line. "This boundary has been here since 1921 and before. We know where it is. We have walked it." She closed the notebook. Lena unlatched the spring gate, swung it open, and let it close behind them with the clean sound it made when it was working right. The same sound the old gate had made for 44 years. They walked home on land that had been in the family since before anyone living could remember, and would stay in the family because the people who held it had learned generation by generation the practice that looked like record keeping but was actually something older than any document. It was the practice of paying attention, of knowing the ground you stood on, not just where it began and ended, but where the water moved under it, and how the soil changed near the creek, and which post had a loose staple, and why the gate made a different sound in cold weather. You did not defend a boundary by arguing about it. You defended it by knowing it so completely that no one could tell you something false about it with a straight face and walk away unchallenged. Kate had known this at 9 years old without being able to say it, and she had acted on it in the 5 seconds between seeing the machine come through the fence and climbing off the corral rail to get the camera. She would know it better at 19 and at 29. She would walk this fence with her own children someday, and she would not explain it. She would simply do it post by post from the northwest corner south, and the explanation would be in the doing. The fence was in the right place. It had always been in the right place. 2 surveys and a 91-year-old federal monument confirmed it. The settlement confirmed it on paper. CBR's own hired surveyor confirmed it in a certified report that now sat in the county records, alongside Haverford's 2008 survey and the Park 2012 survey and the 1921 deed description and the 1961 homestead filing and every other piece of paper that said, in its own language, "This is where the prior land begins and ends, and has always begun and ended." Kate walked beside her mother in the Carbon County morning, her notebook under her arm, the new wire bright on the new post behind them, and the old monument still in the ground at the base of the fence. 14 inches of cast iron stamped U.S. Public Land Survey, 1921, unchanged and unchallengeable in the dark. Under the boundary, it had anchored for 91 years. It would be there when she was old. It would be there when her daughter walked the fence. The spring latch gate swung shut behind them with the same clean sound it had always made.